This is a 2019 Mercedes-Benz CLS, and it's gorgeous. It's also a more thrilling, more exciting, less predictable alternative to the Mercedes-Benz E-Class sedan, and it's just been fully redesigned for the 2019 model year. Today, I'm gonna check it out. I've borrowed this CLS from Fletcher Jones Mercedes-Benz here in Newport Beach, California. Fletcher Jones is the largest Mercedes-Benz dealership in North America, and they always get the best, the coolest, and the first of everything. The CLS has just gone on sale, and of course, Fletcher Jones already has this one. Before I get into the specifics of this car, a little background. Mercedes-Benz calls the new CLS the third generation of the original, and that's very true. The CLS first went on sale back in 2006, and it basically started the trend of sedans that were a little more exciting, a little more thrilling, a little more special and bolder styled than your traditional normal sedans that had been around for a while, like the E-Class. A trend continues today with cars like the BMW 4 and 6 Series Grand Coupe, the Porsche Panamera, the Audi A5 Sportback and the A7, and Mercedes' own CLA, which is sort of like an entry-level version of this car. This particular CLS is a CLS 450, which technically makes this car the base model, although it still starts at around $70,000, which makes it about $17,000 more expensive than a base model E-Class sedan. Part of the reason for that is that a base level E-Class uses a 241 horsepower turbo 4-cylinder, but the CLS 450 uses a turbo V6 with 362 horsepower and 370 pound-feet of torque. The sticker price on this CLS 450 Edition 1 is around $85,000 because this car is pretty well equipped. So today I'm going to take you on a tour of this car, and I'm going to show you all of the interesting quirks and cool features of Mercedes' latest sedan, although Mercedes-Benz insists that this car is a four-door coupe. Whatever. Anyway, then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the new CLS, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of the best preserved 1990s Mercedes models currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now I'm going to start under the hood, where there are a couple of interesting quirks with the CLS, including one of my favorite things I've ever seen on an engine cover. There's this giant script on there that says 6-cylinder, as if it's bragging. Now that may be bragging for some cars, but from a company that makes several 12-cylinder vehicles, printing 6-cylinder on there like a big advertisement for this engine is kind of hilarious to see. It would probably be better if they hadn't put anything on there at all. One other interesting item under the hood, you can see there's a little spot where you can access the positive battery terminal, but rather than some flimsy plastic piece you have to pull off, or rather than an exposed terminal, it's this little plastic slidey thing. You slide it and then you have access. Never seen that before, but kind of interesting. Our next interesting item is up front and has to do with the badging in the front of the car. A couple of interesting things about that badging. One is the fact that if you look closely at the Mercedes-Benz badge, you'll notice that it doesn't have sort of the ridges that a traditional Mercedes-Benz badge has. That's because Mercedes integrates the radar system for the cruise control into the badge. Now the downside is you don't get the traditional badge, but the upside is you don't have some ugly radar cruise module right here. Instead, it's just hidden in the emblem, and most people probably won't even notice that it's different. One weird item though, because they have to have the radar module here, they have to have a Mercedes-Benz logo here, but they also have one here, and so the result is there are two Mercedes-Benz logos on the front of this car directly next to each other, which is kind of odd. Several new Mercedes-Benz models have this, and no one else does. Imagine if this Suburban had a Chevy bow tie right above its other Chevy bow tie. That would be strange, but Mercedes does it. Next, we move on to the headlights, which is one area where the CLS has always dramatically differentiated itself from the more traditional looking E-Class, and you can see that's still true true of the new generation. The headlights in the new CLS are very cool, and the turn signals look very cool when they're on. It's a much more aggressive, bolder look than a normal mid-size luxury sedan. Next up, moving around to the back of the CLS, I want to continue with the theme of the lights for a second, and specifically the fact that if you look into the rear light housings, you will see this substance that looks like glitter. I'm not sure why it's there or what function it serves, but it's really cool. And if you ever have the chance to look into the tail lights of a new CLS and a few other modern Mercedes models, you'll see it. It is kind of cool looking. A couple of other interesting things around the rear of the CLS. One is the fact that if you take a look at the back, you'll notice that there is no visible backup camera. Now, in the GLE Coupe, the backup camera comes out of the Mercedes-Benz emblem. It flips up and it reveals the camera, so you're probably thinking, well, that's what happens here too. No, in fact, it isn't. The backup camera is actually underneath this little line above the license plate. Instead, the Mercedes-Benz emblem has a different purpose. You push it, and the trunk opens up. That allows Mercedes-Benz to keep the rear free of an ugly trunk popper thing, and instead they just integrate it into the rear Mercedes-Benz logo, and it makes the back of the car look cleaner. And next up, since we're in the trunk, there are a couple of interesting items worth noting in here. One is the fact that this car has a grocery bag holder. A lot of cars have them, plastic grocery bag holders in the trunk. The strange thing about this car is it has a fabric loop in order to pull down the plastic grocery bag holder. Why not just have the plastic grocery bag holder? Do you really need to spend the money on that fabric loop? One other interesting item back here in the trunk, there are these little plastic latches at the top of the trunk. What do those do? Well, they unlatch the rear seats. That way, if you're loading something big back here and you don't want to have to go all the way around to the back seats to fold them down, you can unlatch them from the trunk, which saves you time. That's actually a pretty good feature that I wish more sedans had. One kind of disappointing item back here is this rear license plate area. Now, if you take a look at a picture of a CLS from Europe, you'll notice that this whole assembly is removed, and instead the license plate is just inserted in here. But on the US cars, this whole extra assembly goes in, and this becomes the furthest rear point in the car. I suspect because the US government requires slightly more bumper impact regulations than in Europe, and so they stick this on as sort of a bumper supplement. But the result is it kind of diminishes the look in the back of this car, this added license plate assembly piece. Next up, we move on to the front fender of the CLS, where you will notice a badge that says on it, Edition 1. So what exactly does this mean? Well, on some Mercedes-Benz models, when they first come out, Mercedes-Benz releases an Edition 1 to commemorate that it's like the first of that particular model. And so this is an Edition 1 version of the new CLS. You will also see that same badge printed on the floor mat and in my personal favorite spot on the lid for the center console, so you can tell your passengers, yeah, I got an Edition 1. And they'll be like, what is that? Now, the Edition 1 package for this car is a $6,000 option, and most of the stuff is cosmetic. It does make the car look nicer, but I will say it includes a gorgeous seating package that includes this brown trim on these perforated black leather seats. Absolutely beautiful, but really it's just a way to make a fully optioned version of a new model, since people who buy the new model right when it comes out are generally more likely to spend a little bit more in order to have the first one. Next up, we move on to the interior of the new CLS, where there are quite a few interesting quirks and features. I'm going to start in the center console. I love how the center console in this car opens. You push one button and then both flaps of the center console open together at the same time, like the Secret Service opening a double door for the president. Mr. President, your center console is ready. And the other center storage area is further forward, the one that says Edition 1 on it. One interesting thing in there is the fact that the ashtray is just a little plastic thing that they have in the cup holder. It has the Mercedes-Benz logo on it. Open it up and you can put your ashes for your cigarettes in there. Cigarettes have become such a non-thing in cars these days that that's their solution. They don't even bother integrating an ashtray anymore. It's just a little plastic component they give you in the cup holder. Also in that little forward storage area, hidden in there, there is a little key slot slot. So if you get in the car and you don't have anywhere to put the key, you can just tuck it safely in there. Now, next up we move on to the steering wheel. Now, I have a 2012 Mercedes-Benz, and one of the things that I have always complained about with my steering wheel is the fact that there is no next track button for the stereo. They have basically everything else in the steering wheel, but you have to reach into the center console to change the stereo track. Now, this car uses the next generation of Mercedes-Benz steering wheel, so I figured they will finally integrate a next track button, but guess what? They haven't. This steering wheel has 14 buttons, 2 track pads, and a dial, and it still doesn't give you the option to quickly change the stereo track from the steering wheel, and it is just ridiculous in my opinion. Now, you might be wondering, what exactly is a track pad on a steering wheel? Well, it's actually kind of interesting. The one over on the left, you just move it with your thumb, and then you can see it scrolls through various different items in your center gauge cluster screen display. You can check out your car's mileage, your speed, your eco-ness, basically a few different vehicle displays, and that's what that trackpad is for. One interesting item with that trackpad, you can also move it over to the right, and then it highlights the dial on the right in blue, and then you can scroll through various different displays there. You can see, for example, the navigation map, you can see, again, your eco-ness. You can also see your G-forces and of course the standard tachometer as well. So the gauge cluster is very configurable. And frankly, that's the main benefit of having the gauge cluster be a screen. A lot of people are like, well, I like traditional gauges. Yeah, but in this car, you can program it to whatever your preference is. If you want to see traditional gauges, you can do that. But if you want the navigation map there instead, you can do that too. If you want to see your G-forces, that's possible also. The screen gives you more options. Now, the touchpad for your thumb over on the right side of the steering wheel, it controls the center infotainment screen. Now, I've been through the latest Mercedes-Benz infotainment system in the new E-Class and also in the new G-Wagon, so I'm going to be brief here and show you only a couple interesting highlights, but the basic gist is that there is a giant screen here and you can use it to look at a giant navigation map if you'd like to do that, or you can program it to look at a bunch of different other things. For example, the radio, obviously. One interesting item with the radio, you can set an alert so that it'll let you know when your favorite song is on. A lot of cars do that, but in this one, you can also set an alert so it'll let you know when your favorite sports team is playing on some channel somewhere. Now, you go into that and you have quite a few options which are all strange. Now, I see NFL, NBA, MLB, I get what those are, NHL. What is CFB, college football, I guess? What is CBK, college basketball? Why not just write out college basketball? You have a giant screen. Why do you have to abbreviate that term? And at the bottom you have WCBK. Is that women's college basketball? Now, when you click the women's college basketball link, you are directed to an unbelievable list of teams that you can set an alert for so that you are alerted when their women's college basketball team is on the radio. I also like the fact that I'm on the women's college basketball screen, and the system takes note of that with the team names. UMass, for instance, is typically the Minute Men, but here they're listed as the Minute Women, which is how they nickname their women's teams. That is really funny. Also, if you scroll down, Oklahoma State is traditionally the Cowboys, but the women's teams are called the Cowgirls, and the system takes note of that, which is excellent attention to detail. Now, the other interesting thing that this system can do is change your interior ambient lighting colors, and you have an unbelievable number of options. You have fire red and jungle green and all sorts of other different things, and you can make your own colors and blah, blah, blah. No car offers more ambient lighting configurations than this one. It also has features called color flash and color mix, where I guess it decides what color to give you, or it mixes them up or something. But basically you can choose just about any ambient lighting color in the interior of this car that suits your preferences at that exact moment. Now, two other interesting items with the giant screen setup. One is that you can choose between 3 different designs. Your first design is classic, and it looks pretty much like most Mercedes-Benz models. If you choose Sport, it takes a minute to get there, but it gives you a rather different and rather sporty looking screen setup. It's kind of a cool thing. It's a comprehensive change. You can also choose Progressive, And then you get like a futuristic look in the entire screen setup, including the gauge cluster. Next up, one last interesting item in the infotainment system. If you go to navigation voice guidance volume, right now it is at 39, but as I adjust it upwards, I can only get as high as 48 before it says, the volume can only be adjusted in a comfortable range. In other words, you're only allowed to turn up the navigation voice guidance volume before it becomes too loud and Mercedes-Benz determines you might go deaf, and apparently that level is 48. One other thing I like about the screen in the CLS is that the screen in its resting position shows another Mercedes-Benz screen with the mileage at 220,352. Where do you think they came up with that number? What a random group of numbers to put together on your screen showing a screen. Next up, we move on to the rear of the CLS, where there are a couple of interesting items worth noting. One is the fact that the CLS now seats 5 people. There are 3 seats in the back. They made this change a few years ago. When the CLS first came out back in 2006, there was an uproar. You pay more than an E-Class, but you get a better looking car, but it's less practical. It doesn't make sense. Well, now you pay more than an E-Class, you get a better looking car, and it has the same practicality, at least in terms of seating capacity. Now, with that said, I wouldn't necessarily want to be the person in the middle seat. It is clearly the afterthought seat. It doesn't have the beautiful perforated leather and the brown trim, and your feet will have to sort of straddle right here, this middle center tunnel. It isn't exactly the most comfortable spot, but it's there if you need to carry around 3 rear seat passengers in a pinch. 2 other interesting items in the back of the CLS. One is the fact that there are 3 different types of outlets back here, one of each. You have a cigarette lighter outlet, a USB outlet, and then a standard household style power outlet for all of your rear seat power needs. I also like at the back of the center console here, you have these climate vents that you can move around, and their range of motion is incredible. You can point them directly at the ceiling. I don't know why Mercedes decided to allow that range of motion, but if you want to keep the ceiling cool or warm, you can do that in the CLS. As for rear seat room, it's not so bad. Despite this car's coupe roofline, I fit okay back here, both in terms of legroom and headroom, and I would be happy back here for a long drive, not something I can say with 2-door coupe models. And so that's a tour of the new CLS. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the new CLS. Now, I really like the look of this car, and frankly, I have since the beginning. The early CLS models look very outdated now, but I swear at the time it was the coolest thing on the road. But I will say there is the new AMG GT sedan coming out in the next 6 months or so, and it makes you wonder what's the point of the CLS anymore with the AMG GT sedan coming out. I guess I'll answer that question when I drive the AMG GT sedan. All right, accelerating here. Acceleration is good. Real strong, actually. For the base model, it's especially good. And when you look at this car and you think $85,000 for the base model, that's big money, even if it's an Edition 1. You know, you better have some performance to back that up. Well, I'm happy to report that it does. Acceleration is not only good, but it also kicks down very quickly. And one thing I really like is it's very responsive, which isn't always true of V6s. In the age of turbocharging, a lot of these V6s on paper have the same numbers as V8s from the past, but when you actually drive them, they just don't feel as responsive. This is one of the few that I feel like it actually does feel not quite as responsive as a V8 with a lot of low torque, but not as far off as you might think. Automakers are getting to that point where they can replicate the experience of a V8 and still get excellent fuel economy. The ride of this car is very, very smooth. It is not as athletic as my E63, but the driving experience, the ride is so much nicer. This car is very quiet, very composed. Despite its appearance, they haven't shedded so much luxury that the car becomes untenable. It looks like a really cool, angry, thrilling car, but actually it still drives like a fairly, nice, comfortable car like an E-Class. Now, I will say, I do think this segment is kind of dying. SUVs are the new thing. This was a really hot segment 12 years ago when this car came out, but now there's even coupe SUVs, and the traditional sedan and the coupe sedan, they're just not what they once were. But a lot of people still want their cars, and this is a great one. And I've driven the new E-Class.
I've drove an E63 wagon, but I've driven regular ones, and they're similar. But this car looks better, it's sportier, it's more exciting. And so if you can swing the extra cost, this is sort of a cool alternative that looks better.
And so that's the new Mercedes-Benz CLS. This car started the coupe sedan trend more than 10 years ago, but it's a trend that's slowly fading away as SUVs begin to take over the universe. So much so that Mercedes-Benz now sells 2 different coupe SUVs. But if you want a sedan and you want it to be a little more exciting, a little more of a standout than your typical C-Class or E-Class or S-Class, the CLS is a great choice. And now it's time to give it a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the CLS is nice looking, though no longer wildly better looking than the E-Class. Now that the latest E-Class is more attractive than earlier models, the CLS gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds, which gives it a 6 out of 10. Handling is nice and secure, exactly as expected for a car like this, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Fun factor is okay. This being the base model, it's not as fun as higher level versions, but it still gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, cool factor. The new CLS is somewhat cool, but not excessively so, and it gets a 5 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 30 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The CLS is very well equipped and it gets an 8 out of 10. Comfort is surprisingly strong and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is good, the interior is beautiful, but Mercedes reliability is always a bit concerning for the long term and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is okay, it seats 5, but it's a bit tight in the middle and back and the trunk isn't very big, it gets a 5 out of 10. Finally, value. The CLS is well equipped and very handsome, but the one I drove was pretty pricey given the Edition 1 trim and all the cosmetic upgrades that go along with it. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 33 out of 50. Added up and the Doug score is 63 out of 100, and here's how it compares to rivals. Usually I only review the high performance versions of these cars, which is why the E63, the M5, and the Panamera Turbo are on this list, but it's interesting how the CLS stacks up against the Kia Stinger GT. The Kia basically stole the CLS's formula, but does it even better on paper at least, with similar horsepower and performance, more cargo space, and a really long warranty. But you have to drive a Kia, something that will probably turn away almost all potential CLS buyers.